a little cut off. But in any case, welcome to the call out. I'm your friendly host, Davina, and pseudonymously called Dabcat for a few years, but now I've moved to the United States. I'm getting a little bit more comfortable with using my first name. So I'm also just fearful. Trump isn't in power. There's no Kremlin, beholden to the Kremlin operative, useful idiot or knowing asset occupying the White House with all the attendant corruption, willingness to abuse power, etc., that is associated with the pandemicidal ethnic cleansing regime of Donald Trump. Now, I guess it's going to take a while for people to realize this, but I've been pushing the idea for a while that a lot of the current resistance to vaccines and masks, to any pandemic mitigation measures, intensified in nature after it became more broadly discussed that impoverished people and people who work in essential jobs with more public exposure were more likely to contract COVID and were more likely to be harmed by COVID. So even though they pretend that it was just a bias against the elderly, and they say, yes, well, we don't think COVID's real, it's only killing elderly people who would have died anyway. And if you have an accident, the doctors wrongly attribute your death to COVID because they do it for money, which is quite a ridiculous argument given that hospitals lost millions of dollars from having to postpone elective surgeries. And a lot of health screens were postponed as well, but because they are such a cash cow and I guess can be done with a minimal amount of interpersonal contact, a lot of those cancer screening tests resumed after only a few months of being paused. So that's good, but for the people who did receive a cancer diagnosis and who urgently needed surgery, their prognosis might have been worsened or delayed by not just the pandemic, but by the malevolent negligence with which Trump approached the pandemic as the so-called leader of the United States, but who was in actuality someone who acted more to preserve their own self-interest, to try and increase their chances of electoral success in a way that wasn't secondary to helping the public, in a way that betrayed the interest of the general public in order to better divide the public into people who could vote on election day and people who would be more likely to vote by mail out of a rational-based concern about this spreading pandemic. Trump deliberately began a campaign of misleading people about the pandemic. And it's important to realize that when you look at how central to people's identity it has become to push back against what they're describing as government overreach, but is just another step in the time-honored tradition of governments taking action to maximize public health and minimize public suffering. So George Washington may have assured the success of the Revolutionary War by mandating that his troops had to receive the smallpox vaccine. One of Benjamin Franklin's long-standing regrets in his life was that even though he believed in vaccines and modern medicine, as it was at the time, failed to get his 4-year-old son vaccinated against smallpox, and his 4-year-old son died of that disease at the age of 4, which was a source of continuing reproach, self-reproach and sadness, apparently, for Benjamin Franklin. Now, what I have on my right side here is some data analysis from a man who does analysis of publicly available data, and he compiled something that measures, or he compiled a graph, a bar chart graph, that contrasts county level percentage of Trump vote with COVID deaths per 100,000 residents between the 1st of July and the 7th of September. And as you can see, the deaths since that time have been very starkly concentrated in regions that have 70 to, is it 70 to 80 or 70 to 90? Oh no, 90 to 100% Donald Trump. Those regions have 27.7 COVID deaths per 100,000 residents. Many of these deaths are not deaths that can be just ascribed to natural forces or perhaps a lightly hastened death of an elderly person. The scientists who research this type of thing have compiled data to show that COVID is responsible for spikes in the excess death rate. That is to say, deaths that don't conform to the habitual ebb and flow on standard graphs of deaths across any given year, averaged out across the nation. I've only got a few more minutes to chat, but I just did want to make this quick point that I'm really happy that President Biden has taken a step. It's not entirely a vaccine mandate because it's a mandate if you work in public office, but for other places you can choose to either have the vaccine or be inconvenienced by getting weekly testing. And look, a lot of people are pretty happy to see President Biden use his presidential powers to stop the unvaccinated, the irresponsibly unvaccinated, the irresponsibly willfully unvaccinated people from harming those who are vaccinated, including children who might well be vaccinated if they could be, but all children under 12 cannot currently be vaccinated. And parents are sick of the pandemic being unnecessarily prolonged to cater to the stubbornness. I mean, there's degrees of things that are acceptable and things that are unacceptable. And whilst I've just moved to America and I embrace the feeling of freedom and possibility that is attendant on certain dynamics in America, you feel like, wow, you can order anything, you can aspire to start a business, and your chances of success are reasonably good. I mean, a lot of small businesses fail. A lot of small businesses fail within the first few years of opening, but there's still more of a glimmer of hope in a relatively functional democracy, unlike in some dysfunctional right-wing populist totalitarian states or left-wing totalitarian extremist states as well. I should say left-wing populist authoritarian states. There are some, and some people tend to flip between right-wing demagogues and left-wing demagogues. And America tries to stay a steadier course, has a lot of people who espouse centrism as a recipe for political happiness. And that would work if the media didn't have a tendency to get worked. You know, when people work the refs, and how the right has a great ability to pretend to be outraged about abortions, maybe even in a way that convinces themselves, but be warriors for things that aren't real problems, and like, oh, the elimination of the white race because America is becoming increasingly multiracial and multi-ethnic. It doesn't mean anybody's killing the white people. It's just more white people intermarrying with people from other racial backgrounds and producing children who may no longer be exclusively white to the same degree as was the case in past generations. And Tucker Carlson is part of that right-wing demagoguery rhetorical push to have white people afraid and angry that they're being somehow eliminated. You're not being eliminated, white people. We are being voluntarily blended. And most people are welcoming migrants because they understand that increasing your productive workforce increases your tax base, increases your consumer base, and pays dividends economically and socially. So that's all from me today, folks. Short broadcast. I'd like to complain a tiny bit about YouTube removing my content yesterday because I satirically ran with the title Australia's New World Order, which was me satirizing conspiracy theorists, but they just said, oh, your broadcast contradicts medical information and clearly you're anti the vaccine, and we at YouTube believe in the vaccine. I'm like, good that you're policing and getting anti-vax content off the network, YouTube. hooray for you. So I'm not going to complain too much about being caught up in that broad net, but as long as you genuinely are going after all the people. Are you encouraging me to go get the children, darling?
Might need to get them out.
I will. All right, bye, everybody. Take care, and talk to you again soon. Hope you enjoy the replay. Take care.